All right, like I mentioned, today is going to be about contingency plans. Contingency plans are really important. They're really important for the planning stage of your rounds. They're really important for understanding your games before you get into them. And they're really important for adapting. Okay, we're going to be looking at a lot of different ways in which you can prepare your team ahead of time. And there is a lot of different ways that you can interpret contingency plans for yourself. It could be just in ranked. It could be with a team. It can be if you're trying to be a better IGL or a better leader, or it could be if you just want to be a better player overall. Understanding backup plans and understanding contingency plans is a great way of creating some sort of conditioning within your own play style, creating a certain pathing that you can always follow because you know what happens after. So we're going to be looking at a couple of different things. The first one, of course, is understanding what a contingency is. I'm going to just go a little bit more in depth as to what that is. And then after we've kind of like looked into what you can analyze in your games and everybody else's games, we can start talking about what you can actually do to create these contingencies. So let's get started. So if you don't know what a contingency plan is, it is just a plan that's designed around what ifs. It is essentially designed so you do not reach a catastrophic level of errors or mistakes, and it's basically just a plan B. Okay, things do not go according to plan, right? They never really do, but in case they do, right, it's great, it's amazing, but you always got to make sure that you have a backup plan. And what I tell players that is really cool about backup plans is that if you never really use the backup plan, you can use the backup plan in every other round as long as it hasn't been used. Because at the end of the day, the response that you're doing can be conditioned by the enemy team. Oh, they're going to be responding to this after we do this, right? But if they haven't really done anything about it, you can continue doing the exact same plan. And it's really cool when you can just basically, I wouldn't say get lazy, but it makes it better so you can start kind of perfecting the craft of it. I see players too often, you know, they don't really take their surroundings into consideration. They don't really take the information they've had. Both of these are really good tools that you can use in a fight, in a pre-round stage, to plan ahead. The higher the elo that you are, and I've always told this to players, there's a lot of information in this game that you process that you don't really think about, that you look at and you don't really say it out loud because it just makes sense to you. And this is more egregious and more shown in the higher elos. I would say that around Ascendant, this becomes the most problematic, but around Immortal and even Radiant, you'll still see these problems. Again, you still see really funny clips from Radiants that do things that you would not even imagine them doing. And you wonder, is that a Radiant play? No, they were just being stupid. And they're not really thinking about it because they're just doing a play. This happens to everybody. Okay, you're more likely to ignore the subconscious that your brain is thinking about because you might misinterpret it as doubt. You might misinterpret it as just a what if, but sometimes you actually have everything on the right track and you're not really voicing it. You're not really voicing the call out that they might be flanked. They might be flanking or something like that. But yeah, it's really useful for you to kind of think about this decision making and try to be vocal about it a little bit more. It's really useful for creating adaptations in the field as well. Okay. So on understanding contingencies, right, we have to look into the analysis section of things. There's 3 different ways in which you can analyze. You can do it in game, right? In the middle of a game, you can analyze the game in this way. You can kind of create plans and then backup plans. You can do it within a team setting. So I'm going to be showcasing this particular area right here. So this is from the Sentinels play. This was against Loud, and they were playing on Sunset. So what's happening is, I believe this is the American kickoff. I'm not sure. I don't remember anymore. So what happens is, right, in the game, there's a lot of different ways. And the last one is by yourself. Okay. So you can do it in game, in a team, or by yourself. All of these different ways have different avenues of analyzing mistakes and coming up with different ideas. But let's look at all 3 of them first. So the first one, of course, when we're looking at it in the sense of just looking at it in game, the analysis that you're going to be taking into consideration should be restrained into only preventing what works for the enemy team and what works for you guys. There's only 2 points of interest, okay? What works for you and what doesn't. What works for the enemy team and what doesn't. Those 2 points right there are the only thing you should be focusing about in game. It's the only thing you should really be thinking about, because if you start thinking about little tiny things that you could potentially work into the play, then things become a little bit more convoluted. Because one of the things that you always have to consider when making plays is that the stupider they are, the simpler they are, and the more comprehensible, the easier they are to understand, the better the play is. And this is always the case, not only just in rank, but even in like the highest tiers of play. They always have to consider these three things. They have to be easy. They have to be sometimes stupid, and sometimes they just have to be easy to understand. Okay, all of these things have to be considered when you're taking a play into consideration. Because again, let's talk about a simple play. Let's say they are rushing down on your site and you have no idea what to do. They keep rushing my site. We've tried different things. It doesn't really matter what we do. You need to start kind of paying attention as to what works for them. They are taking a main, and then that allows them to take a site, right? That's an example. And you've tried different things. You've tried backing out a site and then retaking. That didn't work. You tried fighting for it, right? That didn't work. So looking at the big picture, you know that A site is being taken. And this is where, again, those subconscious things start coming into place. You should know that B site is not being taken. You should know that mid is not as strongly taken, right? All of these things are not being taken as strongly as A site is, right? And you can use these things to kind of work your way into analyzing that. You can use these as flanks or as different anchors for you to make a new avenue to fight against the enemy team, okay? So, because again, if you're kind of playing and you're backed up against the wall, you're going to lose. So you have to look for different avenues of kind of interpreting the enemy's play. Okay, let's talk about number 2. What happens when you want to do it in a team setting? In a team setting, it becomes a lot easier, I would say. So this is where this area comes in. So if you were, for example, starting from scratch and you are a nobody team and you want to make plays right off the bat, you're doing it wrong. Nobody starts from scratch. Okay, there's always a play that has already been pre-designed. So for example, like a rush, okay? Sentinels did not come up with rushes. They just adapted it to their own playstyle. And that's what you need to do. You cannot make your own play. In order for you to design your own play, you need to reinvent the wheel. It is not necessary, okay? So when you're looking at these things, you should be observing your opponents. You should be observing what the enemy has done. You need to scout, right? Who are you going to be playing next? I'm going to be playing next team. Okay, I'm going to look at this team, right? You need to be looking at pro games. How did they react? Okay, and this is where I was talking about this area of a focal point of the strategy, because you need to make sure that when you're looking at that, you need to look at how they react. Okay, I'm going to be talking about the micro and the macro aspect of these different plays in just a second. But when you're using these main plays, figure out what works for them. So for example, in this play right here, their intention was to control a main, it was to prevent a rush, and it was also to get this gecko his orb. He actually got the orb, and then he was able to use his ult for a retake onto B. This is the main focus, because what happens is this guy provided a flash of these two could swing, yada, yada, yada. These guys over here were not as important. There was a Cypher over on B. He was not as important. So you can see that the focal point on this A hold is up to these 3 players, right? And then after that, you can start developing a little bit more past that. So you got to make sure that you're observing those games, observe how they react. And this allows you to alter them into what works for you. Maybe Omen doesn't have to be here. Maybe they can be on B and they can also be taking space on B somehow. Maybe they can create a choke in their own way, right? Maybe a one-way, who knows? But that's basically what you need to look at when you're paying attention through a team lens. Now, lastly, by yourself, this is what happens when you're in solo queue. It is actually one of the hardest ones to implement, just because you don't know if the enemy team will listen, okay? You might be younger, so that you might not actually be interpreted as a strong voice to kind of voice your opinion. I know that there's a lot of problems with women, you know, and girls that want to voice a certain call out and they can't, right? So solo queue is very hard for you to do, okay? But there are things you can do to create these plans, and you need to just focus on yourself. You need to identify what mistakes you make in the middle of a round that allows your team to lose control of it. So a good example is Jet players, Reyna players. I find that these players find themselves in an aggressive position always, trying to get an early pick to avoid being flamed by the team. This is very common for players that want to kind of make an impact, or those that believe that climbing is just about being right into their face, right? You do not need to always focus on that. You need to see what actually keeps you in control of the round. Whether it is just jump peeking to keep them scared, whether it's just about throwing a flash when they're about to entry, and then maybe getting a pick, right? You can try different things. I always tell players you have 3 risky plays that you can try per half. So go ahead and kind of experiment a little bit onto what works. You don't have to voice it all the time. And if you need to, again, you can just put it into the VC chat of things. But that's what you need to really focus on. You need to focus on yourself, see what works into these backup plans. So this is what really brings us into the backup plans of things. Okay, let's start talking about the pre-round uh, conversation. Okay, I've talked about it a lot of different times as to how you should be doing it. I've given you guys certain guides that you can use to sort of talk about it. So we're gonna just kind of introduce this again, this time with maybe a little bit of a meter so you can kind of understand. So there are two stages of the pre-round. Okay, there is pistol round stage and then there's the normal round stage. Okay, pistol round has 45 seconds and then the normal one is just 30 seconds. The way that you need to split it up is understanding that you cannot bring previous feelings from like another round into the next. So this is what the first square is. The first square, you should be spending 5 to 7 seconds max thinking about the last round. It could be, oh, nice shot. It could be, oh, that sucked. I should have gotten him, right? All of those things should be out of the way. It could be something as simple as the guy aced. Move on. I get it. That was a cool ace. Move on. I cannot stress that enough. Players do not come up with plans because they're too busy just glazing their teammate. And that's, again, that's cool for morale, but there are other things that are a little bit more pressing. Because at the end of the day, maybe they got that ace because that was the only option they had. Why were you guys out of options, right? Think about it like that. So think about everything that's emotional about the last round and just get it over with within 5 to 7 seconds. If you need to put 10 seconds into it, be my guest, but that takes away from the other things. Okay, here's the next one. The yellow, and I'll let you ask a question in just a second. So the 5 to 10 seconds, same thing, just depending on how much you spent on the red. The yellow is about asking questions. You want to spark a conversation that might potentially highlight what a play that a teammate did, a play that the enemy team did that can allow you to get an edge. It could also be a really good way to instill confidence. Yo, Yoru, that was a really good TP. It allowed me to entry really nicely into sight. Or that was a really good dash. That was a really good flash. Anything of the sort that allows your team to sort of get prepared or give them an idea of what works, it gives them an incentive to do it again. And that's what allows a lot of initiators to maintain some sort of control because they're confident in what works or they are able to kind of control what the duelist does. Hey, that was a really, really good trade, right? Stuff like that, things you can do together. That's the question aspect, or that's the more that's basically the, I would say, the inquiry stage. Okay. Last is the green stage. This is where you guys just plan. You got about 10 to 20 seconds to plan. Like I said, keep it simple. You guys have a lot of different plays depending on the round and depending on the half. So for example, you can create on attack, you have a contact play, you have a rush, you have a default, and you have some sort of split, right? These plays right here, you can kind of work with depending on whatever way you want. You can kind of change it up a little bit while still maintaining these cores. You can do a default with a fake. You can do a rush with a fake, right? You can do stuff like that. You can do a split, but leave a lurk. There's always something like that that can branch off of those main plays, but they're still simple. It's still one extra variation to the main core of that play. Here's where things become a little bit more intriguing and different than what most people are used to. This is where the contingency plan comes in. You want to make sure that you're conditioning your team to react a certain way. Okay? This is where you need to do it. If they do this, prepare for this. That is basically the way that you should be structuring your final stage of the plan. Let's default. If they have an op, go B. Something like that. It's simple. If they smoke here, contested with this. If they don't do this, do that. You should always be adding a little bit of that and just kind of try to see what works and what doesn't. Because at the end of the day, if you're not really putting anything out there, your team is just free balling. And I'm going to be honest with you, it doesn't go really well because now you're just gambling again. Not only did you just gamble on 4 different teammates, now you're gambling on the plays that they're going to make. That doesn't give you a lot of control. And that's basically what pre-round talk is about, and that's how you should be using it. And again, for those that don't really talk, don't really have a voice, don't really wish to speak, then you got to make sure that you're considering all of those different things that they've said. And again, focus on yourself. If I am the duelist and they want us to push, I am not going to push, or I'm going to ask for a rotation if they do this. And you might just put it in chat, or you might have that plan in your head. That is the backup plan that you've designed for yourself, and then your team can choose to follow suit. Obviously don't bait your team or bait them into entering without you, but that goes without saying. So one of you had a question. That was Arsh. You had a question, I believe.
No.
Oh, I thought you had a question. Did someone have a question? I thought I heard someone.
You heard me, but then you actually covered it.
Oh, I covered it. Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, The last 10 to 20 seconds is about planning. And this is why you want to make sure that you don't really spend too much time on this stage. This is actually where most amateur teams, where most solo queue teams, all of that stuff, this is where most of their time is being spent. Don't do that. I like to redirect the conversation most of the time through question and then segue onto an actual plan. And like, again, it doesn't have to be exactly 20 seconds. You can spend 10 seconds to make a quick plan. And if you don't have a plan, just default. Okay. It's not going to do anything negatively towards your team. You can just tell them to default. If they know what that is, you'll be fine. Okay. If you look at pro play, it's pretty common and it's okay. Okay. Don't worry about that. Okay. So like I mentioned, there are a lot of different ways of explaining the plan to people. And when you're preparing contingencies, when you're preparing backup plans, you need to understand that there's two stages to the plan. There is a macro stage and there is a micro stage. For macros, you got to make sure you're focusing on the entire team. And micros, it's about individuality. It's about a simple player. Okay, one player, what is it? So to kind of develop it a little bit further, the macro stage is about giving a full play, a full breakdown of the objective, the overall purpose of the play. We're going to default with the intention of getting picks. We're defaulting to get their smokes. We're defaulting and we're going to end on A. There is an objective in mind. This is where you're trying to go. This is the whole purpose of the macro stage. However, the macro stage doesn't necessarily mean that's the end all be all, right? When you're looking at the macro stage to create a backup plan, you got to make sure that, like I mentioned, you're trying to condition your team to have a response. And again, it's just as simple as if they do X, do Y. If they do Y, do Z. If they do A, do B. If they do B, do C. It's something like that that needs to kind of be kept in mind. And over time, you'll be a little bit it'll be easier for you and you'll be better at doing it. But it doesn't come naturally to some players. And that's okay. It is okay for you to look at
I have a question.
Go for it. Go for it.
All right, so I was hanging out with my friends and I missed like half an hour of the class. Can we restart?
Yeah, okay, man. That's not possible. All right, I will ask you to meet though. Don't worry, I'll be uploading this class. So if you really, really want to do it, I recommend you watch it at 1.5 speed. That's how I watch my classes.
All right, thank you, man.
So here's how it goes. So the macro stage, okay? The macro stage, like I mentioned, it's about creating the overall goal. So in order for you to create those preconditions for your team, it's not going to be easy. You just have to make sure that you have some sort of plan in mind. And this is where you look at the things that happened in your elo, or particularly what happens in your matches, or maybe you've played it against a particular team and you have a certain response. So let's say you decide to rush A, and the first thing that happens is they drop a smoke. The amount of times I've seen teams just lose it because they don't really know what to do there is astounding. You should not be stopped by a smoke. You need to have a plan ahead of time. Are you going to contest the smoke? Do you have information? Do you have flashes for it? Do you have a rotation in mind? Did you leave a lurk? Are you defaulting? These are questions you should be asking when you're looking at a play. And sometimes it's just as simple as a smoke. Sometimes it's as simple as them contesting back by pushing forward. It could be something as simple as the enemy team is rushing, so therefore we're not prepared for this push. Maybe your teammate hasn't fully set up on defense, right? These are things that you need to make sure that you have in mind. And when these things go wrong, this is where the micro stage comes in, okay? Because again, micro is about the individuals. This is about fine-tuning the timings and making sure that everything works. If you're in a team, the macro should be your coach or your captain, giving the idea of what's going to happen. The micro is where the individual player shines, okay? Individual players need to be autonomous, okay? They need to be able to react to plays when necessary, because I've seen that a lot of players don't spend their time honing their own craft, and they're not really giving themselves enough time to really improve. So again, if you really want to improve as an IGL or a leader, try to master the macro. It's going to help you a lot in understanding the game, and it's going to give you better game sense. However, if you want to improve as a player individually, you got to make sure that you master those little micro things. You need to practice off server, something like satchels, like I'm showing right here. It could be something as simple as practicing your lineups. It could be something as simple as practicing your one-ways. It could be the pathing that you're going to be taking as a duelist, or the setups that you're going to be doing as a defender on Cypher on B, maybe, for example. These are the things that you should be using to sort of create a plan ahead of time, because the more you develop these things, the easier it will be for you to come up with adaptations on the fly. And this is where backup plans come up again. If you do not have the game sense as to what happens when you just face the problem head on, You're not going to be able to come up with a plan in the pre-plan stage. You're not going to be able to come up with a plan on the fly. You got to make sure that you experience it first, because experience is a really good teacher. So you got to make sure that you experience it first and then see what happens after. Again, on the same note, a lot of players doubt themselves. It's okay to doubt yourself. Try it first and then see what happens. Because a lot of players think, I saw this play work, and you don't know why it worked, and then you try it, and then you failed. I saw Zekin use a deagle and push halls. Why did he do that? What was the whole purpose of it? Have you seen the play when what happens towards A or B or something like that, right? These are things that you have to just experience yourself so you can see what they are preparing themselves for. Are they trying to prevent any rotations? Are they just trying to hold halls from any lurks? Make sure you're paying attention to that type of your gameplay. Paying attention to those types of situations in your game. Okay. This is where I was talking to you, Arsh. This is where you kind of come in. This is where your example kind of comes in, and your little question as to how to improve. Adaptations are where the player individually shines, and this is where players have the worst time adapting. So let's say you don't have a team, screw all of these plannings. I don't have a mic. I don't have anything in regards to that, but I do watch a little bit of games occasionally. I only like to play the game though. This is where planning becomes at its worst, because you do not have any sort of autonomy. You don't have any sort of experience as to what happens other than what goes on in your games. And the problem with it is really difficult for you to accept that there's going to be a certain play that you're not going to be prepared for. And that's why you need to make sure that you're looking at your tool set. Okay. There's a certain form of hierarchy when you're looking at these plays. Okay. So first of all, let's look at this example right here, and then we're going to be breaking it down into different types of plays and seeing how that works. So let's say on this example, we have a Jet that decided to try to get into like maybe an aggressive stance, try to get a fight, couldn't do it. They no longer have dash. The hierarchy shows that the first step that you need to look at is, where are you playing in terms of your gameplay? Are you playing aggressively or are you playing defensively? Which one are you using? Then after that, you can kind of move on to the next stage. What kind of tools do you have? What exactly do you have left? So for example, do you have a smoke? What are you going to do with that smoke? Do you have an updraft? What are you going to do with that updraft? If you're playing aggressively, you can use it to split sites, maybe provide a little bit of a one-way here, maybe contest them by throwing a smoke down on the floor. If you're playing defensively, you can use something like a smoke to maybe get yourself out of that situation. You can use your updraft to maybe get out and potentially even retreat if you don't really need it for a fight later down the line. You have knives or something like that, right? Looking at those things, look at the tools that you have in your own kit. Next, look at the kits of people nearby. Is an Omen nearby? Is someone like a Breach nearby? Is anyone able to help you out? Looking for things that can be really supportive are the next step, and you got to make sure that they fit with that playstyle you have picked. If it's defensive, can you give me a smoke? I need to get out. If it's aggressive, can you throw me a flash? I'm going to go in. Right? These things are things that players do not really think ahead of time, and they try to isolate themselves on their own bubble. So this is where you come in, Arsh. You're trying to take too much space at once, right? You're trying to get yourself into the fray. You're trying to get as much space as possible. And like you said, when you see a CT smoke, you tend to push it to try to surprise the opponent. You're in an aggressive position, but in that position, sometimes you don't even have dash. If you're playing a flash character, you might not even have that, and you're not even asking for the tool sets that might supplement this playstyle, right? So it comes to a position where you don't have any backup plans. How are you going to be bailed out? How are you going to be playing that aggressive position? You don't really think ahead of time, and this is where you can kind of use this hierarchy to go forward. Last but not least, let's look at your positioning, and has this been done before? Okay, so if you're looking at positioning, see how it affects your plan. Now, Jet did not just go Shadow Clone Jutsu on me. This is just the different positions that you can use. So for example, if you're playing aggressively and you didn't have dash, you can use these aggressive positions, maybe with a smoke in tandem with another player. You can use this maybe with a shotgun. You can use these here. Maybe you want to play a little bit more far back. You can use these two right here, or maybe you can retreat to tree. You can use something like that to maybe catch the opponent off guard. You can use your smokes, maybe delay what's going on over here in tree. You can use all of these options because you've considered what's in your kit, you've considered who's nearby, and you've considered what you have available to you in terms of positioning. Let's say that you were a little bit more aggressive, but you want cover. You can play back there, maybe in hell, maybe on top of here. I wouldn't recommend it, but that's also another option. And last but not least, has this been done before? Have you played dice before? Have you been playing Gen all this time when you retreat? Do you always leave? Are you giving them a site for free? Do they expect you to play this angle? Have they seen it before? If all else fails, if you do not have a really good aggressive play, if you don't have any tools, if no one's nearby, if your positioning doesn't really support the defensive play style that you want to do, you can just retreat. At the end of the day, you can just retreat, and that's going to be the best optimal play, because this is, I will say, more likely in lower elos. You want to keep playing the game. Don't just die with the intention of just trying to see if you're going to get something, or to see if you're going to get lucky. Clips are clips for a reason. They're rare and they're really hyped for a reason. Okay, so just keep them that way. Don't try to force yourself in situations where you don't really need to be, because at the end of the day in rank, that's the only person you can rely on. Okay, you can only rely on yourself. So with that out of the way, does anyone have any questions about contingency plans? Does anyone have any questions about the idea of creating plans ahead of time and using them to sort of prepare ahead of time for the opponent? Does anyone have any questions in terms of what your backup plan should be when you're making a play? Anything of the sort?
This might be a little off topic, but what do you do if like your team's too like incompetent to like follow what you're doing correctly? Like what you're asking.
So let's say, for example, we're using that. We can do what we said all the way back.
Oh yeah, I wasn't even here for that.
Yeah. And this is where you kind of have to focus on yourself. I always tell players that you need to kind of look into analyzing what works and what doesn't. And in ranked, when your team is just not doing anything for you, you need to focus on yourself. Try to have a focal point in mind. So if your focal point was to be aggressive and your team is not even giving you flashes, then the focal point of the play is not going to work. Okay. The whole point of the play was to be aggressive. Your team is not going to do it for you. You can't do anything about it. But maybe there are things that you can do about it. Maybe you can do something like, for example, catch an opponent off guard, maybe delay a push. Maybe you can use it to sort of catch someone that might be lurking, and then that could be the form of aggressive play that you're looking for. But you always got to make sure that you're paying attention to what's happening around you. Because again, if you're backed up against the wall and your whole point is just to push out and your team is not supporting you, you're not doing it right. Okay. Try to adapt that part of the strategy. Because again, you're supposed to be autonomous. If you're relying on your team, again, that's good. It's a team game. But if your team is not helping you out and they're making you worse, try to give them calls. And then if that even doesn't work, again, focus on yourself. What can you do? Right? So don't do any team plays. So for example, pushing out, because that requires multiple players to do. But you can still do other things. Holding an angle. Off angles, if you have a dash, do that. If you have satchels, you can try to use them to kind of surprise the opponent with a shotgun. I don't know. Try something. But these are along those plays that you can kind of try. Does anyone have any other questions? None? Perfect. Let's get started on the whole scrim thing. Let's end this here.